Hi, I'm Jeremy.
I'm Eva.
And I'm Suhani. And today we're going to be talking about movie remakes and sequels. Whether they're good, whether they're bad. Let's discuss.
So, in my opinion, a lot of these movies don't actually need sequels. I feel like the story has already concluded and these movie makers are just adding on unnecessary events just to earn more money.
I agree with that. I think sequels for good films are usually not necessary, but I do appreciate it when a sequel doesn't necessarily take itself too seriously, and it can be a fun way to add on to the legacy of the story without disturbing the original work.
Yeah, I agree with you guys, but I also think that the act of creating a sequel isn't necessarily a bad thing, even if it is a cash grab, because you're always going to have cash grabs in these movie studios, and having a sequel at least brings attention to the original, which is often really good, and it leads to more people noticing the original and watching it.
I think that if the original movie itself lacks a conclusion just so that the director can create a second movie, that kind of detracts from the overall feeling of the original movie, and it can make the movies worse if people are just planning on making more movies in the future.
I think going on the point of purposely leaving a cliffhanger so that you can leave space for a sequel, I think sometimes that can also become just lazy story writing, because they're the writers might feel because they will be making a sequel eventually, they can just leave a lot of things unexplained and push it back, right? And it's interesting to think that that could not only make for a bad sequel, but even make the original worse. So
Yeah.
And even building on that, there are certain movies that have already ended and they're still trying to make more sequels, which I feel is just kind of confusing. I feel at that point, just start a new story. For example, a lot of Disney movies, their plot is long concluded, but maybe 10 years later, they come out with a sequel that seems to be totally unrelated to the original story.
This summer I watched Inside Out 2, which came out I think 9 years after the original, and I remember being 7 years old and watching Inside Out 1 in the theaters with my parents, and then I watched the second one also in the theaters with my parents, so I felt the movie did a really good job of making the story interesting for younger audiences as well as older audiences. So I don't think it's always that big of a problem when a sequel gets released way after the movie finishes, if they're just trying to make a high quality product.
Yeah, I also really enjoyed Inside Out, and I think one of the things that made it such a great movie is that Riley, the main character, almost ages with the audience, because I feel in between the time of the first movie and the second movie, she's also grown older. I think the problem arises when the audience is kind of outgrowing the actual characters or the plot, and so if the characters aren't also kind of developing in the same time as the audience, it can feel like if you're going to watch the second movie, it's just not something that really interests the original audience anymore.
So my favorite movie is actually a remake. It's Pride and Prejudice 2005, which is a remake of the 1995 movie, which is a remake of the book. And I think that when the movie is actually improving on elements of the original and it's adding its own new thing, then the remake can be a really positive way to continue the journey of the story. I remember when I watched the Pride and Prejudice movie, I was actually really inspired to go and pick up the book, even though it's a little bit dense and maybe something that I wouldn't usually read. And I think that was a really nice result of watching the remake.
So sort of in contrast to that, I want to offer the point that a remake can be kind of dangerous, because like you said, it's good when they introduce they sort of respect the original, but are able to introduce fresh ideas. But I think there are also times when a remake can like disturb the quality of the original work. So like in the context of Disney specifically, I feel like their live action remakes are sometimes a bit questionable, especially like the ones with the animals, like when that's sort of like, it's like trying to turn like translate animated animals into like live action kind of animated like models of animals. I feel like that in that process it's really hard not to lose like the essence of like it being an animated film. So like those are pretty hard to watch.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that point. Like I love Disney live action movies. Usually like the live action Aladdin is one of my favorite Disney movies. But yeah, I agree when it's all like CGI animals. That's a bit off-putting. Because at that point it's kind of still animation. It's just a little scarier. And I think that just sticking to the original iconic cartoon characters is a lot better in that sense. And I also wanted to build off the other remakes point. There's a lot of times where this kind of ties back to like the sequels point as well. So for example, Mean Girls 2, they tried to kind of continue the story, but like they couldn't get the original actors back. So it's all like different people trying to pretend to be like the same characters. And at that point, it's kind of the same story, but kind of different. And so I feel like that's kind of an example where the producers are kind of trying to profit off the title that's like another Mean Girls movie to get the same demographic to watch the movie, when in reality it's just not as good as the original.
I see what you mean about the producers trying to profit off of the movie, but I think that's the case for every movie that comes from like a big label, because like honestly they're not making the movie so that they can express their artistic vision. They're making the movie so that they can attract as many people as possible and so that they can make a profit. So I think that movie remakes aren't exactly like the worst thing to happen in that case.
Yeah, I think that's interesting because it kind of brings up the question of like, is it the fact that it's a remake that's the problem, or just the fact that, you know,
it's bad.
The movie quality is bad, right? Because I feel like, I don't know, I don't have any like concrete evidence on this, but I think some of Disney's more recent productions, like animated films or whatever, like the quality has varied a bit. Like even just like looking at it, like the visual quality. Like I know, for example, for Frozen 2, they invested a lot of money and had a lot of it. Like it, at least visually, it was very stunning. But more recently, I think there's just some projects that have gotten maybe a lot of investment, and others are just like like even more plainly just cash grabs. So yeah, like, and that applies to like both original films and remakes. So,
yeah, and I think that, in my personal opinion, I feel like there's just so many like sequels and remakes these days. It kind of seems like they're running out of story ideas, like whoever's making the movies. And even when they're creating new movies, I feel like their stories are starting to get very repetitive.
So I think Disney has definitely built like, you know, it's one of the original animation studios, right? So of course there's going to be some expectation going into like for each Disney film. But I also think, looking back at Disney's history, they've had like a lot of times when they had to like reinvent themselves, and they've had their like output is very diverse. So there is also the expectation that Disney continues to innovate and, you know, bring in fresh ideas, which is a bit of a concern.
Yeah, and I think the last time I really saw a bunch of like fresh new ideas come from Disney was really in the 2010s, when we had Frozen, Moana, Inside Out, etc. And I think that right now it seems like they're going through like a creative drought of sorts.
Yeah.
But I also think we should like give Disney some grace, because they've had like creative droughts in the past, and you know, like over time I think they've proven that they can get over that. And catch on to whatever is the new wave of movies. So yeah, hopefully they can do that this time. All right, so despite all the varied opinions we have about remakes, sequels, I'm still looking forward to what our studios will show us and surprise us with in the years upcoming.
Yeah, so those were our thoughts about movie remakes and sequels, and we would love to hear what you think, so please drop a comment below if you would like to add to this discussion.